So my name's Ezra. I am an organizer with, I'm an organizer with Students for Justice in Palestine.
And I'm Eliza, and I'm an organizer with Students Against Cop City. And we'll have QR codes at the end if y'all want to get plugged into either one of those movements on campus.
Definitely. Okay, so we're going to start first with the current context for Gaza. Let's go ahead and raise your hand if you know what Zionism is. Okay, that's great. Can anyone define it?
It's the historical and intellectual movement for what they would say is a Jewish homeland,
Mm-hmm.
but it's So in terms of theoretical origin and also mass participation, Zionism is a Christian-driven movement of colonialism.
That is a very comprehensive way of saying it. Does anyone else have another interpretation of it?
It's like the belief that like Jewish people like a homeland for people without a home. Of like, oh, all this stuff happened to us during the Holocaust, so this like we deserve a home, and like nobody lives here, so like let's just take it. But
No.
people live there.
Right.
So.
Exactly. So I want to go ahead and just preface this by saying that this is going to be a very brief overview of some of the atrocities that Israel has enacted against the Palestinian people. This is by no means a comprehensive list, which I think really speaks to the genocide that's been going on for the past 75 years, that this is barely scratching the surface. So I just want to preface that. Okay, so yeah, we're going to start in 1948, which marked the ethnic cleansing of Palestine by Zionist militia that established the original state of Israel, and that was 75 years ago. I want to define settler colonialism. Settler colonialism is the process by which foreign people invade a territory under the oversight of imperial power and settle on the land as a part of a larger colonial project that involves the necessary displacement of indigenous and currently existing populations. So to go back to our audience members' definitions, the way that you enact the idea of Zionism is through the settler colonialist project. You have to displace the indigenous population in order for the state of Israel to exist. So to visualize this, if on the far right, or is that left to you guys? Left, on the far left, that was Palestine before the Nakba in 1947. And then as you move to your right, as time goes on, you can see that it's getting smaller and smaller. And it's very similar to what we saw, we didn't see it, but in America, when colonizers came, we made an agreement with the Native Americans and slowly took away their land. Very similar, so that we are also a settler colonial state. Not many people know this, but 70% of Gaza's populations are actually a part of a diaspora, and many of them are refugees from the 1948 Nakba. Okay, so the current conditions in Gaza prior to the October 7th attack. We're seeing a lot of, Israel controls Gaza by the land, air, sea, and can cut off water, electricity, and telecommunications at any time. So what we see is an open-air prison. I know a lot of y'all might have heard that term used, and what we are actually seeing, it's a wall. There's walls, you cannot come out, there's multiple checkpoints. Food and water is, coming into Gaza is only determined by the Israeli state. So this isn't a Palestine is its own state and then Israel is its own state. Israel is in charge of Palestine and in charge of Gaza and controls food, water, and electricity. Miscarriages have skyrocketed since the October 7th attack, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but we're trying to show that this is a feminist issue as well. Miscarriages have skyrocketed to a likelihood of 300%. 78% of piped water in Gaza is unfit for human consumption. 1.3 million in Gaza require food assistance. people don't have access to healthcare. People don't. This is all prior. This isn't. So it did not start at October 7th, which is what we're really trying to emphasize here. So here's a little bit of context, a little bit of history. So we're going to start in the first Intifada. This was the first original mass organization. There had been multiple times where people have revolted against the Israeli occupation, but this was the first time you're seeing a mass revolt against Israeli military occupation and settlement expansion. The Oslo Accords were signed by the Palestinian Liberation Organization in Israel. It divided the West Bank into 3 areas and helped create the Palestinian Authority. And that was meant to represent Palestine as a future legislative body. But in reality, what we see is that the Palestinian Authority is really just a puppet king, essentially, for both the United States and Israel. They're not really advocating for the Palestinian people in the West Bank. This is not a real legitimate body. Hamas won in January 2006 legislative elections of the Palestinian Authority. And so this was due to the success of the Islamist social sector and the services that it provided people, ranging from charities, or orphanages, healthcare, and more. So to just imagine that is like, they basically, if you don't have food, you don't have water, you don't have any of these needs, and then you have Hamas coming in, you might not agree with all of their views, but they're the people that are providing healthcare, they're providing orphanages, they're providing the necessary things that you need to live, that the Israeli state is not. So these elections were widely regarded as democratic and free by international observers. So basically, in June of 2006, a joint Palestinian operation tunneled under the border wall between Gaza and Israel and attacked an Israeli outpost and abducted a soldier. Despite many Israeli attempts in retrieving this soldier through military operations, all attempts failed. And this led to the prisoner exchange in 2011, which resulted in thousands of Palestinian prisoners being released for a single Israeli soldier. So this is actually a very important reason to why the Palestinian resistance factions attacked on October 7th, because there's precedent for when they capture Israeli hostages, specifically soldiers, they release all of the they release a big chunk of prisoners that Israelis already have of Palestinians, where they're being mistreated, abused, and tortured. So moving to 2009, Israel breaks a ceasefire with the Palestinian resistance and stages a raid in Gaza, killing 6 Palestinian fighters. This resulted in a battle between the Palestinian resistance and Israel, and what the Amnesty International called 22 days of death and destruction. Israel, during this period, conducted a high-altitude electronic bombings of civilians and civilian infrastructure, leading to 1,400 casualties. The majority of them, not the majority of them, 300 of them being children. Despite heavy loss in Gaza, popularities of the resistant faction still increase, while the support of the Palestinian Authority plummets. And then moving to 2014, similar back to in 2009, but this time Israel killed 2,000 Palestinians, more than 500 of them being children. But because of the intense resistance faced by Israel, leading to more casualties than they expected, this led to what was known as the Quiet for Quiet arrangement, which brought Israel and Gaza back to pre-2014 conditions. So the point that we wanted to really articulate here is that Israel basically has been using the October 7th attack as a reasoning to commit I think we're over 25,000 martyrs. They're using all of that October 7th, where I think it was about 1,500, is that correct, of deaths? it's going down. You see all of these deaths, but it's not October 7th that started the original attacks. These attacks had been happening. Israel had a ceasefire agreement with these Palestinian resistance fighters and have broken that ceasefire multiple times. And so for them to use October 7th as an excuse to genocide people it's not valid, even if we look as far only back to 2009, 2014.
Right, and there's this narrative that October 7th was when Hamas broke the ceasefire, but we're just going to show you that the ceasefire has been broken by Israel multiple times.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, so we're going to move on to October 7th. So yes, we can say that the attack on occupied Palestine was immoral by Hamas, but it's in the same way that any military attack, any loss of human life and any loss of civilian life is immoral. But it is not comparable to the 75 years of genocide that has been enacted on the Palestinian people. And we say this through actual military attacks, but also legislation.
Also, I just wanted to say, like, it's immoral, but it's also, like, different because it's, like, it's a resistance. So it's like, if you're oppressing people, what do you expect?
Yes,
Because,
exactly.
like, what else are people supposed to do if you're depriving them of all their materials? They're gonna fight back in
Exactly.
the best way that they can. So, like, yes, it's immoral, but it's, like, a fallacy to focus on that immorality and not look at, oh, there was a reason. Because people are making it seem like, oh, it was just, like, the thing that they felt like doing, but it's, like, there was a purpose behind it.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's a power imbalance there, and I definitely think that's a great point. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay, so this is to talk about the breaking of the siege back in October 7th. That's why a lot of us are here. Basically, we saw that in October 7th, Palestinian militant groups, including the Palestinian Islamic Jihad and other factions, launched a secret attack where fighters flew into 1948 lands using motorized paragliders, landing in the Jewish settlements built around Gaza. Specialized units began searching for Israeli soldiers and settlers to take hostage, while rockets were launched by other forces into Israel to provide cover and cause confusion. Other Palestinians took advantage of the situation, using bulldozers to destroy parts of the border fence, symbolizing Palestinians breaking out of the open-air prison that is called Gaza. And it is this moment that represents the breaking of the siege, the undying will of human beings to be free by whatever tools that they have at their disposal, and that's not many. For many of the Palestinians who broke free and went past the wall, this was the first moment that they stepped outside of Gaza. For many of those Palestinians, this is the first time they stepped foot onto the lands from which they were expelled. This moment represents the breaking of Israel's illusion of invulnerability and entrenched the question of Palestinian liberation. It went from an if, but to a when. And then we're seeing basically Israel's response. Israel is deliberately bombing all residents in Gaza and has made it clear that it's not only targeting Hamas, as reported by Palestinians or on the ground, and as Israel's official genocidal statements. The Palestinian officials have conflated Palestinians to human animals.
Israeli officials.
Yes, I'm sorry, I apologize. Yes, Israeli officials have conflated Palestinians to human animals, and that is what you're seeing on your phone. A lot of the bombings. It's sick. It's sick. So the ministry says that the death count is about at 2,500, including civilians and Hamas fighters, with about 70% women and children. And health officials have also said that 6,200 people.
52,000.
Thank you. Numbers come hard to me, guys. Thank you. 62,000 people have been injured in this conflict. In the past 24 hours, the ministry has said that 178 Palestinians have been killed and 293 have been injured. So again, what you're seeing on your phones. We're seeing, I think there's 0 hospitals now. They've targeted all of the hospitals. There's
I think
There's still one?
That
I
was
think
the
Vassar was the last one.
I think, yeah, that was the
Yes,
last
I
one.
think so.
Additionally, like deliberately bombing schools and mosques and civil infrastructure, and then spinning that narrative and saying that Hamas is using civilians as human shields. It's like a clear example of collective punishment. They're not just targeting where they think Hamas is, they're targeting where they know the biggest population centers are, which is showing clear intent of genocide.
Oh, I was just gonna say on the topic of schools, it's, the other day I just saw a video where the Israeli forces deliberately set off hundreds of mines around the Palestinian, I don't remember the name of the university exactly, but, a university with 8,000 students and a large school. And in that case, there wasn't even anyone around, or there clearly wasn't anyone around, and it was just purely to make sure no one can come back.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I saw,
oh, go ahead.
I think I saw a video today, like, it was IDF soldiers in the school mocking and pretending, that they were like giving a class, but it's terrible to see, like, that they're intentionally targeting children, and then making light of that as well. What were you gonna say?
Oh,
I think all the mosques are now gone too.
And it's just, they're ancient lands, right? Like, wasn't the oldest church ever
Yeah.
bombed as well?
Third.
The third oldest church. And people went crazy when Notre Dame was bombed. Not bombed, caught on fire, and everyone, all the anthropologists were like up in arms, but
I think it also shows a clear intent to not just like counter like war insurgency, but to wipe out Palestine as a nation, Palestine as a culture,
Yeah.
Palestinian cultural institutions, and Palestinian futures.
Agriculture.
Food, and they're like,
Mhm.
oh, well, this was always ours. Like, I saw this one picture, like, of Palestinian food, and they had the Israeli flag in there, and I was like, it's crazy.
I'm gonna ask that we try to hold our questions till the
Oh,
end from
I was
now.
just gonna say, correct me if I'm wrong, but they were burning the lands so that they can't have olive trees anymore, and olive is like a big part of Palestinian culture. So that like made me really sad. And when you burn that, it makes that land like arable, or is that the right word? Like
Non-arable.
Yeah.
not arable. Okay.
I love all the comments we're getting. The sad reality is that we could probably all talk about some horrific video we saw for another 3 hours. And I think we would like to hold questions and comments until the end if y'all are okay with that. Just for the sake of time.
Okay. Yeah. So it's a genocide, as we can all agree. Starting at the Nakba in 1948. I encourage everyone to go ahead and do their own research on this throughout history. There's so much. But basically, U.S. and Western diplomatic cover for all attempts on holding Israel accountable in the International Criminal Court. We're seeing criminalizing and villainizing of all forms of nonviolent resistance to Israel. I think it was the HB 30.
Yeah.
Their HB 30 just passed in Atlanta, which basically made it redefine anti-Semitism to include any type of what one.
Palestinian, right? Is it like for Palestinian?
Yeah, it was anything that condemns Israel in any
Anything
way.
condemns Israel.
Yeah. So that just happened in Atlanta today. So there is just a lot of criminalizing even protests.
Which we'll talk about later.
Yeah, which we're going to talk about later. Western's media's role is demonizing Arabs, especially Palestinians, as bloodthirsty criminals acting out of an irrational hatred, ignoring and minimizing the crimes of Israeli occupation since the Nakba, and uncritically parroting Israeli propaganda to deceive audiences and manufacture consent for war crimes. A little video.
While this video is playing,
When you grow up in American schools, you learn history, tells you that it's either Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, that's you gotta choose what side you on. And we met with some Palestinian activists in Ramallah, but one of the things the sister said was, if a foot is on your neck, you gotta do everything you can to get that foot off your neck, right? At one point, you're like, please get the foot off my neck, please, please, please. Then there's a moment you start to say, hey, you gotta get that fucking foot off my neck. And then, at some point, you start to reach around and you see what you can get to try to take that foot off your neck. And if at some point, this is where I'll probably try to end, if at some point you, the person watching, witnessing, does not help the person who has the foot on their neck get the foot off their neck, you have no right to talk about how they ought to resist the foot on their neck.
It was so good that we wanted you to hear it twice. So here are some resources that we encourage you to go ahead and take a picture of, so that you can continue to do your own research. Decolonize Palestine is a really, really good one. It has it all laid out really well. But yeah, all of these are good ones, and a slide for documentaries will be next as well. That we'd also encourage you to watch if you have the time. Cool. So we're just going to talk more about the intersections between Cop City and what we're seeing in Palestine today. So
Yeah, so thank you, Ezra. They just handled the more Palestine-centered part of this presentation, but now we're going to move on to the second part, which is a little bit more locally focused. First, we're going to start with the War on Terror and then move more specifically into Cop City, which I'll go into in a second. But first, I want to start with the War on Terror. So, hold on. Okay, so sorry, this slide. So the War on Terror, I'm sure you guys are all familiar with this term. I mean, most of us in this room have been in school in the post 9/11 world, but if you don't know, the War on Terror, which is officially called the Global War on Terrorism, is a global military campaign initiated by the United States following the September 11th attacks. So these are sometimes also called like the wars in the Middle East. And there's a lot you can talk about with this, but what we're going to talk about here is specifically the effects that it has had on Islamophobia and Islamophobic hate crimes here in the United States, as well as the racialization of Islam, which includes troubling and persistent assumptions about Muslims, Arabs, Muslim and Arab Americans as terrorists or outsiders, or that they are incompatible with modern democratic nation states such as the United States. So for those of you who might not know, we have programs here in the United States where we exchange information with our different military and police and crime control forces with those in Israel. So the history and tactics of both the Israeli occupation of Palestine and the United States' historical violence towards Black and brown communities are very connected. They have both sort of grown together and learned from each other, especially since if you think historically, the Nakba and the creation of Israel were in 1948, and then the 50s and 60s is when the civil rights movement happened in the United States, and then a lot of issues with the FBI and Black Panthers, and I mean, I'm sure you guys all know a little bit of this history, and we don't have time to get into all of it, but I'm going to show you guys how these are a little bit connected. So these are U.S. law enforcement agencies that train with the Israeli military, police, defense ministry, and Shin Bet, which is the Israeli security agency, which is sort of comparable to like an FBI that they have. The Shin Bet is pretty well known for systematically torturing Palestinian detainees, adults and minors, as well as carrying out targeted assassinations, which can be completely baseless, with little legal oversight or accountability. The UN Committee Against Torture has specifically condemned Shin Bet multiple times over the past 30 years for its use of violent interrogation tactics, which continue today. David Ben-Gurion, who was Israel's first prime minister, drew forces from the paramilitary group Haganah to form Shin Bet, and Haganah was notorious for its use of violence against the Palestinians and the British forces before Israel was created. So basically, we have like a group that has been condemned by the UN Committee Against Torture that our law enforcement agencies are training with. And that is in the high levels such as FBI, and it gets down to as granular as the Georgia State Police Force, which we'll talk about a little more. So above is a graphic with the names of some examples of U.S. military, policing, and civilian control programs that all operate as parts of a larger, what we call the national security machine. And these are all appendages of the state here in the United States that include actions that are done in the name of keeping Americans safe or counterterrorism, but often result in many things such as the over-policing of black and brown communities, hate crimes, expanded surveillance, deportations, racial profiling, even so much as torture, and fostering mistrust between different marginalized communities and their struggles, preventing unification of racialized people and working class people from coming together. So I'm about to talk a little bit more about Cop City, but if you don't know, and I'll get into it later, Cop City is an explicitly racial issue and it's an explicitly black issue. It's very tightly entwined with the movement for black liberation. And so the goal of teach-ins and community actions like these is to understand, to help people first view these systems in America as all interconnected and all as part of a larger sort of apparatus that works to control any liberation movement that is working against the goals of these machines, and at the same time as part of a larger system internationally that works with forces like Israel to try to keep both Palestinians down and racialized people in America down. So, back to the global war on terror real quick. It has resulted in the murder of 12 million people since 2001, produced 38 million refugees, and cost the American public $8 trillion, which is taxpayer money. And currently the U.S. is running counterterrorism operations, which we are very liberal in our definition of what counts as a counterterrorism operation in at least 85 countries globally. And you can imagine what countries those are. So with Cop City, the counterterrorism infrastructure that I've been talking about with the war on terror is also being deployed to test out how far state governments can target movements such as the Black Liberation Movement, and destroy internal and communal solidarity within these movements. So the use of domestic terrorism charges, which I'll get into in a minute. I keep saying I'll get into it, but I will. So the use of these domestic terrorism charges activates a legal system that gives the state expanded power and further strips individual rights of protesters, peaceful protesters. It also activates the militarized surveillance and incarceration systems that are linked with counterterrorism, which have proliferated over the past few decades with impunity. And so it activates this legal system that has given military and police agencies the cover to murder individuals without public outrage. Extrajudicial killings are a key tool in the war on terror, and you might think of extrajudicial killings as something that happens in a faraway land as part of the war on terror. But our very own Stop Cop City activist Tortuguita, Manuel Paez Terran, was murdered actually 1 year ago, last Thursday, protesting the construction of Cop City by Georgia Bureau of Investigation officers. More on that in a second. But basically, labeling individuals and communities with the terrorism label isolates and stigmatizes individuals who often end up navigating complex systems that sit at the nexus of the prison industrial complex and militarism, immigration enforcement, and national security, which that's a lot of big words. But basically, this is all to help you guys start to see, or maybe not start, but see all of these programs and all of these systems as working together and not as separate things. So, I'm going to talk about the GILEE program. GILEE stands for Georgia International Law Enforcement Exchange. It is a program that includes exchanges between the Atlanta Police Department and other countries, including and primarily with the IDF, which is the Israeli Defense Forces. That's their military. The GILEE program was founded by Dr. Robert R. Friedman, who is a professor at Georgia State. He's a noted anti-Muslim bigot who has a long history of Islamophobic and right-wing trainings. He has a record of actually going so far as to physically attack Muslim students and Arab Americans, denying that Islamophobia exists, and he is on record complaining that the Second Amendment prevented the FBI from targeting mosques. So the Gilly program was originally founded by this guy in 1992 under the guise of part of this larger counterterrorism movement that I was talking about. Specifically against, there was a lot of worry about terrorism with the 1996 Atlanta Olympics, and so this was sort of formed to prepare for that. And then in the years since and up to 2002, the Atlanta Police Department, specifically in 2002, but it's been going on since then, has sent a 16-member delegation of police chiefs, command staff, sheriffs, and other law enforcement officials to Israel as part of the Gilly, in their 29th annual training program. And one thing that's important to note is you're going to see me talk about Atlanta a lot, and I did just mention the Atlanta Police Department, but the Atlanta Police Department does not, like, many of those officers that are part of the Gilly program are either transfers or on loan from other parts of the state. So if you and your family are from the Atlanta area, this affects you, but additionally there are police chiefs from other parts of the country that have attended this exchange. It sort of operates as like a cop for an exchange program. Like other people from other schools can go on UGA exchange programs, other cops from other precincts and states can go on Gilly exchange programs. So, what do I say? So the Gilly program, yes, sorry. So what I'm trying to get with these slides is to show some similarities between things that are happening in occupied Palestine and things that are happening here in our home state of Georgia, just 60 miles down the road in Atlanta. What you see on this slide is that this past August, the Georgia Attorney General brought RICO indictments against 61 activists in the Stop Cop City movement. So y'all probably know about RICO indictments because they are hot in the news right now. Fani Willis is indicting Trump and his goons on RICO charges, but that's the Racketeering Act that was created, I think in the 70s it was, to basically get organized crime rings. I think it was intended for the mafia. And it's basically a way of targeting people working in some sort of movement or some sort of capacity together and saying that they are part of a large criminal enterprise and putting them all in jail, which is ridiculous when you consider that some of the things cited in this indictment against these 61 activists, many of whom had never met each other and didn't know each other, were things as small as buying glue for making protest posters for toddlers to save the trees, because as I'll go into later, part of Cop City is it's being built on an urban forest, so there's a movement to protect the trees. So someone bought glue for those posters for toddlers to protest defending the Atlanta forest, and that was enough for the Georgia Attorney General to indict them as part of a criminal enterprise, buying other arts and crafts supplies, handing out posters. So you can see here the label of terrorist and furthermore the legal label of a domestic terrorism charge is being used here in Georgia, and it's no coincidence that this is happening at the same time as the conflict in Gaza. So here's a picture of some personnel from the Gilly program in June of 2015. So that's the Georgia flag, and that's in Israel. So what is exchanged at these trainings? There's mass surveillance technology. I'm going to go a little bit into that in a second. But mass surveillance technology coupled with racial profiling strategies, coupled with protest suppression strategies, and border militarization. Border militarization isn't necessarily as important here in Georgia, but there are other officers specifically from border states with Mexico that are being trained in this program, so that could, be relevant for them. So, I went through some of this. It is funded by the GSU Foundation, so it's actually housed within Georgia State University and their police force. So Georgia State University is in the same university system as we are, so a lot of the money that is funding us and funding the lights being on in the MLC right now is also being funded to Gilly, and also the U.S. Department of Justice, among a bunch of unknown others. They're sort of secretive about the finances, but yeah, and then obviously, as you guys probably know, just from being UGA students, a lot of the money that funds things like the GSU Foundation is corporate donors, so like Coca-Cola, Chick-fil-A, Waffle House, Delta, etc. to get more into the nitty-gritty of what is being exchanged here, certain methods include neon neck, shoot to kill, and leaving blue lights on in cruisers while policing neighborhoods to increase the amount of arrests. And methods of racial profiling, mass surveillance, and arbitrary detention. Arbitrary detention being a big one because that is what allows the IDF to take so many prisoners. So, who in Georgia? This is a good question because we are here in Athens and we're not specifically in Atlanta. We checked with the Athens Police Department. There have been no Athens police officers trained with the Gilly program since the 90s, but we have tried to ask the University of Georgia Police Department and they have said they will get back to us many times, so they're not being very clear with their records. We do know though that there are more than 12 Georgia police chiefs, 3 Georgia sheriffs, the former director of the GBI, some DOJ members, Georgia Public Safety Training Center, and the Georgia Department of Public Safety all have personnel that have trained with Gilly and therefore with Israel. But what's important to note here is that it sort of doesn't matter if one person from Athens PD or UGA PD has trained in Israel. That's sort of a bad apples lens to look at it. It's not that there are some bad police members who have gone to Israel and learned their bad things. This is a systemic exchange of trainings, and it's not only the people who go to Israel that learn those tactics and that implement them. They bring them back and they're implemented across departments. So, the APD, I believe this was in 2013, visited the network of 400 plus cameras in the old city of Jerusalem, so that's where most Palestinians live, that monitor Palestinians, most Palestinians within Jerusalem, that monitor these Palestinians. And following visits to Israel by the APD, the department created a video integration center, whose goal is to, quote, collect and monitor footage from the city's thousands of public and private 24-hour surveillance cameras. So the APD reported that the center is directly modeled after the command and control center in the old city and mimics Israeli methods to proactively monitor crime, which is, to proactively monitor crime is to profile people. You only put cameras and watch cameras in places that have people who you think will commit crimes. So by instituting 24-hour surveillance, that is a way of systemically enacting profiling. So, and if you guys don't know this, Atlanta is the most surveilled city in the entire United States with a ratio of 48.93 cameras per 1,000 people. So Chicago beats us in number of cameras, but we beat them with ratio of cameras to people by almost double. So, Gilly and Cop City, what's the connection? So this is a model of the proposed plan for Cop City. I've been talking about Cop City a lot, and I realize I probably should have put this slide a little earlier in the presentation, so forgive me. But if you don't know, Cop City is a $90 million, although that should now be updated to say $108 million because last week they just updated the finances, urban warfare training facility that is planned to be constructed in the Wilani Forest, which is a forest that was originally native land in South DeKalb in Atlanta. It is funded by the Atlanta Police Foundation, which is a private foundation, and its corporate donors. So again, all of your favorites, Coca-Cola, Waffle House, Chick-fil-A, Delta. Did I say Waffle House? We can't have anything. But, and the city of Atlanta. So basically the APF committed to funding it with $30 million, and then Atlanta was going to match that to make it a total of $60 million, and then they were going to match that with double to make it a total of $90 million, and then now there's 108. And all of that, all of the city of Atlanta funding is all taxpayer dollars. So if you or your family members or your loved ones or friends live in the city of Atlanta or pay taxes in the city of Atlanta like I do, your money is going towards building a militarized urban warfare facility. And so basically, it's not actually called Cop City, it's actually called the Atlanta Training Police, whatever it's called, Public Safety, whatever. But activists have dubbed it Cop City because it is a fake city that they are constructing to look like parts of Atlanta, predominantly black and brown parts of Atlanta, where they're going to have like fake storefronts, fake riots, fake protests to better practice tactics that they've learned in the exchange with Gilly, such as neon neck, shoot to kill, anything basically targeted at anything at suppressing civilian protest. So we don't know the exact specifics, but actors could be involved, crisis actors, and the irony is that they are building this fake city on top of a forest that was native land and then was actually a plantation where people were enslaved, and then the land was sold to the city of Atlanta, who used it as a prison farm where people who were imprisoned labored for free for about 30, 40 years. And then finally it was the city of Atlanta tore all of that down, and it was used just as a park for people to enjoy nature. This is some of the only nature that is readily available in South DeKalb, which is predominantly black, predominantly low income, with some of the highest asthma rates in the country. So having trees around is great for purifying the air. Additionally, some really serious flooding problems. You can talk to Isaac, who is a urban freshwater ecologist after, if you're interested in the floodwater effects that could happen without the trees in Cup City.
It's one of the four lungs of Atlanta.
Yes. So there
yeah.
are 4 forests, sorry to take over, urban forests in Atlanta that are considered the 4 lungs, because we have, in Atlanta, we have some of the highest percentage of urban forest, like as percentage of our land. And yeah, they're gonna tear down a whole quarter of that. And they've already clear cut actually a lot of it. And they're pouring concrete right now. But fight is not over just because of that. So this will be specifically a militarization training facility, right, which we're talking about this interchange between Gilley. It's to not just educate police officers on how to be better, but how to specifically train them in suppression of civilian protests. This will also include shooting ranges and bomb testing sites, which this is in a residential low-income black neighborhood. So obviously that's going to, there's a school nearby. I talked to a mother who has an autistic son who likes to go in the forest. It's the only thing that calms him down. She's now scared that there's already shooting in the area, and she's scared that now her son is going to get shot because he's going to wander into the forest. I could go on and on with anecdotes. I'm getting a little sidetracked, but it's despicable. So the plans to build Cop City had been in the works for a while, but they were accelerated after, if y'all remember, the 2020 Black Lives Matter movement, when Black Atlantans and allies took to the streets to demand an end to police brutality and over-policing. And then by 2021, city officials and corporate leaders recognized this uprising as a threat to their control over black and working class people. And we say corporate leaders because a lot of stuff that happened in these riots was damage of corporate property, and a lot of different corporations have their headquarters in Atlanta, like CNN and Delta and stuff like that. So Cop City coming at this time is no coincidence. It's their attempt to further suppress liberation movements in Atlanta and strengthen their ability to protect the racial and class-based hierarchy in the city, because we have some of the biggest stratification of classes in the country. So we're in Athens, we're not in Atlanta, so why does this matter? Cop City goes beyond Atlanta. By APF's own admission, that's the Atlanta Police Foundation, the private foundation that funds Cop City, more than 47% of officers trained at Cop City will be from out of state. So if 47 are from out of state, then the other 53 is definitely not just from Atlanta, they're from all over Georgia. And given the existing Gilley program, we can expect that some of these will be IDF soldiers. So this could mean, we don't know for sure, but currently the Gilley program is housed in GSU, which is 4 miles from Cop City. Why would they not put that shiny program in the shiny new building? I mean, I can't say this for certain, but it's very likely that the construction of Cop City will only strengthen the Gilley program and its funding. And this matters if you are out of state or if you're not a Georgian, because since the plans for Cop City were introduced just 3 years ago in 2021, other proposals have popped up in Chicago, Hawaii, Texas, Tennessee, Baltimore, and many others. So the one in Atlanta would be the very first of its kind, which is why it's so crucial that we fight against it, because it will set a precedent, and this will lead to militarization of police precincts across the nation. So, Cop City is bringing the US and Israel's imperialist tactics home. This is a quote from an article with a police chief, the former UGA police. Tel Aviv is comparable to Atlanta. The city life is the same, so when people are trying to imagine what this is like, think about something catastrophic happening in Atlanta to one of our police stations, Chief Gale said. So one thing that is just instrumental to understanding the exchange and the similarity between Cop City and between what's happening in Gaza is that the IDF built its own cop city in 2005, long before we ever had any inkling of what Cop City here is. So was a $45 million facility in the Salim Army Base. This was built in 25 after the Second Intifada. And so this was created long before Cop City, like I said, but it is officially also not known as Little Gaza. It is known as the Urban Warfare Training Center, but the Israeli soldiers who run it actually themselves have dubbed it Mini Gaza. And it can accommodate exercises for an entire brigade of 2,000 soldiers at a single time. And visiting American troops, which is Gilly, I mean, there are others, but when they say visiting American troops, that means Gilly, have also trained within this Mini Gaza. They actually go so far to replicate it as having the Muslim call to prayer played over speakers and having an official IDF graffiti artist to graffiti fake pro-Gaza graffiti to really enhance the vibes of Mini Gaza, to really make it seem as if it is Gaza, to prepare these soldiers for what it will be like. This is a photo of two IDF soldiers. This one is wearing a keffiyeh and pretending to be a fake freedom fighter coming up from a fake tunnel within fake Gaza, as you can see in the background, and his fellow soldier pretending to shoot him in a drill. So this type of thing is real. Cop City is not like something that is really in the hypothetical right now. We are copying the template that Israel, or not we, Cop City, Georgia, Atlanta, would be copying the template that Israel has given. So, what does this mean for our struggles? This is Ezra's slide, not mine. That was a lot.
Yeah. So the point of this teach-in is to really tie in how Black liberation and Palestinian liberation are intrinsically linked. Not just in policy and in practice and with Cop City, with Little Gaza, with things like Neon Neck. We saw it with George Floyd. That's how he died. That is a Israeli IDF tactic. We see, I'm from Atlanta, like I'm consistently seeing blue lights everywhere. That is a program we got from the IDF. So these are not just in theory tied together. This is very much a tangible connection, both through the Gilly program and the mock cities that we're seeing. So that is why it's imperative that as Black people, as people of color, colonized people, we need to be able to come together and recognize our similarities and how it's a consistent thing, and it's not just Palestine, it's not just the United States, it's Guatemala, it's Korea, it's all of these different places that are consistently being settled or colonialized, basically. Sorry.
Yeah, and furthermore, I mean, we've showed in the presentation, it's also a feminist issue, it's also an environmentalist issue. One thing that's really wonderful that I've seen in my organizing with Cop City is that it's awful that there are so many lenses you can take to look at it, and it's part of so many struggles, but it's also beautiful that so many different people of different backgrounds can come together to say that this is not what we want for our communities and not what we want for our future. Here are some resources specifically about Cop City, if anyone is interested. I'll leave that up for a second if you want to take a picture. Additionally, beyond this, UGA Students Against Cop City, which I'm an organizer with, has an Instagram account. It's just UGA Stop Cop City. If you just search some sort of amalgamation of UGA and Stop Cop City, it'll show up. If you are not a student, or if you want to be involved with a slightly older and more geared at grad student crowd, we also have Athens Against Cop City, which I'm also part of. They're wonderful people. That's, I think, just Athens Against Cop City on Instagram. Again, if you search some combo of either Athens or UGA with Stop Cop City, those Instagram pages will pop up. And do we have the QR code? Oh yeah, I'm just gonna put this before we do our discussions. If you guys don't know what Signal is, it's an encrypted messaging app. If you don't have it and you'd like to be part of organizing with either SJP or with UGA Students Against Cop City, I'd really like for you to download it. If not, if you just want to stay up to date on our info, you can follow the Instagram. But that is a QR code for our Signal, and then this is an onboarding group me for SJP, if anyone is interested. So we'll give people a second to pull out the phones. And we can put that back up at the end if anyone misses it. But we have about how long? Like 35 more minutes that we allocated. You guys welcome to stay longer. We have the room booked until 8. But I think we're going to move to some discussion now.
Yeah, so we have our 2 discussion questions. We hope that people will pair up in groups of 3 to 4 to discuss with their fellow peers on these 2 questions, and then we'll come together. We'll first start with the first one on the far left.